We rarely ever hear the word clutch used in MMA. After all, there aren't extra innings, overtime, or 7-game series. We're talking about fights, not basketball, not baseball. And what does that mean to be clutch in a fight? Well, number one, you have to be overcoming some kind of odds or a deficit. Maybe you're down on the scorecards, you're getting beat up, and you need a finish. Getting that finish is clutch. Or let's say you're in a 5-round title fight, you're down 2 rounds, and you've got to make an adjustment. Being able to make it is clutch. But I want to focus on the greatest clutch moments in MMA, not just your average comeback KO, so that means the stakes need to be high. We're talking about title fights. We're talking big names with legacies being on the line. These are the kind of moments I want to get at today. So without further ado, let's look at some of the most clutch moments in UFC history. The one fight that comes to mind first when I'm thinking about clutch is DC and Stipe Miocic, specifically the rematch. That's right, the comeback finish from Stipe in the 4th round, the body shots. Everything about this fight has the makings of what it means to be clutch. It's the epitome of clutch. You have there being the highest stakes you could possibly imagine, a big heavyweight rematch with Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. I know that DC may have not technically been at the peak of his prime, but it damn near felt like it because he was coming off of a KO over Stipe. He knocked him out in the 1st round badly, and this was Stipe coming off of a win over Francis Ngannou. Stipe Miocic just dominated him and had broke the record for the most heavyweight title defenses in UFC history. So for DC to knock this guy out, I mean, let's be honest. If you're a heavyweight and you're Stipe Miocic, you gotta fucking bring it back for the heavyweight division. You can't let this light heavyweight come up and take your throne and make your division look weak. And on top of all of that, if Stipe loses this fight, well, his heavyweight GOAT status is basically rebuked. So you have to hold it down for your division. You know what I mean? You have to put on for the other heavyweights. You have to represent. And that's a lot of pressure. And not only that, but you're coming off of a devastating KO loss. And guess what? Stipe got his fucking ass whooped early on in that fight. If you don't remember, Daniel Cormier took Stipe down. He came out with extreme confidence, knowing that he could knock Stipe out cold like he did in the first fight, and instead he resorted right to the wrestling. And he got the ball rolling early, picked Stipe up, slammed him on the ground, dominated him with the grappling early, and basically got in Stipe Miocic's face and just beat the fuck out of him with dirty boxing. And Stipe, it took him quite a while to find his jab, to find his right hand. And so anyway, DC is beating up Stipe. He's walking him down. No respect for the power of Miocic. And Miocic, that's a guy that's laid a lot of people out. That's a guy that was known for knocking people out in big title fights. So imagine you're Stipe Miocic. You're down 3 rounds. And even though you're having a little bit more success, I mean, you're still not rocking this guy. You're not coming close to putting him away. And even if you win the next 2 rounds, that's not going to be enough. He needs some kind of a finish, and DC has a granite chin. So how the hell are you going to get to him? Well, you go to the body. Daniel Cormier was known for parrying his opponent's hands, for always trying to fight the hands so that he could trap them and then get it on the inside. So every time DC would try to fight the hands of Stipe, he would expose a part of his body, and it was open for the left hook. And we're not just talking about a couple of body shots. We're talking about 14 total hard hooks to the body. And the 14th, well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It took the wind out of Daniel Cormier. He basically dropped his hands afterwards, and Stipe was able to come up top with a big right hand. He rocks DC, follows him up to the fence, and knocks him out, getting his belt back. And once again, being the heavyweight champion of the world, Stipe Miocic will forever have one of the highest fight IQ moments in UFC history. And again, this is just the epitome of that quote, the famous quote that we hear from boxers: if you go to the body, the head will fall. Alexander Volkanovski down 2 rounds to none against Max Holloway on Fight Island in their highly anticipated rematch. And not only that, but I like to call this melatonin gate because the night before, Alexander Volkanovski was woken up by USADA so that they could test him in the middle of the night. And he's always talked about how that really fucked him up and made it almost impossible for him to fall asleep. So you have a groggy version of Alexander Volkanovski going into this rematch against Max Holloway, the fan favorite, the second best featherweight of all time. And you go in there and what happens? Well, you have yourself a close first round, and all of a sudden, Max Holloway catches him with a head kick and drops him to one knee, gets a knockdown, and gets the first round out of the way. He turns over to the commentators and basically puts his finger up to his mouth as to shush them, to tell them to be quiet and just observe the masterclass that's unfolding. Second round begins, another close round. At the end of it, Alexander Volkanovski gets dropped again, this time with an uppercut, and Max bags another round. So all of a sudden, you're down 2 rounds to none against Max Holloway, who's looking supremely confident, who is feeling the best he's ever felt, and he's knocked you down in the first 2 rounds of a fight. This is a guy that's known for turning up the volume, turning up the heat. Max Holloway is one of the most terrifying guys to fight in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. In fact, in their first fight, the only round Max Holloway won was one of the later rounds. So what happens? Volk is down. He's groggy. He's coming into this fight, melatonin gate. And I think what happened is that Volkanovski kind of just went away from the game plan and just started fighting, just started throwing, slugging it out with Max Holloway and trusting in his instincts, getting rid of all hesitancy. And Volkanovski edges out the 3rd round, outstriking Max Holloway by 10 strikes. He had 25 strikes landed in the 3rd round to Max Holloway's 15. He goes out there in the 4th and yet again gets slightly ahead of Max Holloway, but it's still close. What does he do at the end of the 4th round? He gets a takedown at the very end of the round to cap it off, to make it look real nice for the judges, and all of a sudden Volk has worked his way back into this title fight, and it's 2-2 going into the 5th. And then the 5th and final round, Alexander Volkanovski outstrikes Max Holloway 37 significant strikes to 23, and he gets 2 takedowns in this round as well. Even though when he came out at the start of the round, he looked exhausted and Max Holloway was the one that was looking fresh, Volkanovski just fucking gritted it out and was able to get it done. And yes, this was an incredibly close round too, and of course there were plenty of people that gave Max Holloway the fight, but at the end of the day, Volkanovski coming back 2 rounds down in a title fight. If he loses this, he ain't getting the rematch. Max Holloway was the big fan favorite. You think they were going to give Volkanovski a rematch? No one wanted Volk to win. People weren't fucking with Volk that much. Unless you were training with him at his city kickboxing gym, unless you were his friend or family member, you probably weren't rooting for Volk more than you were for Max. He needed to make sure that people would not be able to look at that original win that he had over Max Holloway the fight prior and just call it a fluke, call it a one-off. An off night for Max Holloway. Volk turning the tide after being down 2 rounds to Max Holloway has to be mentioned as one of the clutchest moments in UFC history. Imagine if Max Holloway were to have got his hand raised that night and he were to win. Well, Volkanovski wouldn't even be on our radar for being a top 10 fighter on the all-time list. That Brian Ortega win that he ended up getting, that TKZ win, those could have been fight night main events, and they just simply wouldn't have held the same weight for his legacy. And Volk would probably only have a couple of title wins, even if he did end up fighting Max again in a trilogy and beating him. Leon Edwards knocking out Kamaru Usman in their rematch. One of the craziest KOs I've ever seen, and unlike most of the finishes that I see as an MMA fan, where I'll stand up and I'll put my hands on my head and I'll start yelling, I had no words. I couldn't even make a sound. I was that dumbfounded. I was that shocked. Seeing someone like Kamaru Usman, a guy that had the aura of invincibility, a guy where fans just never thought he was going to lose, seeing him not only get finished, but seeing him get knocked out cold with one shot, eyes rolling in the back of his head against Leon Edwards after Leon was getting dominated, after Leon was looking like a defeated man. This has to be one of the craziest comebacks and one of the most clutch moments in UFC history at UFC 278. Let me take you back. We know that Kamaru Usman had the bragging rights to be able to say that I beat Leon Edwards in the first fight. I took him down and I beat his ass. It honestly looked like Kamaru Usman was on his way to becoming one of the GOATs. I'm talking about maybe being a top 5 fighter. If he were to have gotten this win, he would have looked unstoppable, and with maybe one more, would have been put on par with George St. Pierre by many, given the quality of his competition. And so basically, Leon has some success early. He takes down Kamaru Usman in the first round, being the first man to ever take Usman down in the octagon. Now, we all know that Colby Covington took Usman down, but it just wasn't the same. Usman popped right back up to his feet, and of course, they didn't give Colby the takedown credit. But in this fight, it was completely different. Leon tripped Kamaru Usman and held him on the ground. Not only held him on the ground, but took his back, sunk in the hooks, and threatened a rear naked choke. But Usman comes out in the second round and starts putting on the pace, starts putting on the pressure. Leon starts tripping in the cage. He starts falling over himself, and he's just having a sloppy fight. Also, keep in mind, it's at altitude. We're talking Salt Lake City. Leon Edwards is not a guy that's necessarily known for having a high pace. He's a lower output guy. Kamaru Usman, the CEO of EPO we're talking about, some of the best cardio, some of the best pace in UFC history. He's just picking it up ever so slowly. He's just getting better and better as the rounds go on, and Leon Edwards is just fading. It's getting to the point to where Leon Edwards' coach, they're giving him rocky speeches in the corner. Get a hold of yourself, son. Don't let him bully you. Because he looked like a defeated man. He was slouched over. He was feeling sorry for himself. And Kamaru Usman was just walking him down with that inescapable march forward and just jabbing him up against the center of the cage and taking him down, rinse and repeat. The next thing you know, Kamaru Usman is a minute away from winning the title. We're in the 5th round. Usman just banked the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And Leon Edwards, out of nowhere, head kick, KO. The KO heard around the world. In my opinion, this has to be the 2nd most shocking KO in UFC history, behind only Conor McGregor knocking out Jose Aldo in the first 13 seconds. But again, like, this was in a way almost as impressive just because Leon was on the verge of losing. He was on the verge of being a flash in the pan, bro. People would have forgot about this man. Leon Edwards hardly has a very brash personality. He flies under the radar. His performances aren't even that entertaining to begin with. If he were to lose this fight, oh, you better believe he's not getting a title shot anytime soon. It already took him fucking 9 fights in a row to get that title shot originally, man. Leon Edwards, bro, knocks out Kamaru Usman, the pound-for-pound #1 guy, which was just insane. Every single fan that night looked like they had seen a ghost. It's one of the craziest moments in UFC history and the definition of clutch. Last but not least, we're going to go with Anderson Silva submitting Chael Sonnen in the 5th round at UFC 117. Going into this fight, Anderson Silva had 7 title wins and was the massive favorite. Even though Chael Sonnen was a guy that was known as being a really good wrestler, for the most part, no one really expected him to win this fight. And of course, Chael was talking a whole load of shit going into this matchup against Anderson Silva, and because Anderson was such a big star, it just blew up the fight that much more. And this fight was looking like it was going to be one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, as Chael Sonnen knocked Anderson Silva down in the first round, took him down, and beat his ass. And guess what? The next round, rinse and repeat. The next round, round number 3, rinse and repeat, all the way up until the 5th round, where before the final finish, Chael Sonnen had landed 300 plus total strikes and had 19 plus minutes of control time. It couldn't have got any more dominant. Even the commentators at the time were talking about how Chael Sonnen could probably just start celebrating. And with 2 minutes left on the clock, Anderson Silva sinks in a triangle and taps out Chael Sonnen, which has to be the most insane comeback submission in a title fight. And that just did so much for his legacy. So this one has to be mentioned. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time. What is up, guys? It's Lucas Tracy MMA here. And I want to let you guys know that I have something for you. And that's a real food cookbook. Because if you're walking around looking like Chris Dawkins, you got to get that weight off.
I don't know if you think you're DC or something, but most people usually don't perform at their best when they're walking around with 30% body fat. So if you're trying to lean out and you still want to eat good, tasty comfort foods, well, you could check out my Real Food Cookbook, because I've made it a purpose to have good, tasty foods that you can still eat just without all the processed bullshit, without all the processed ingredients like soy and seed oils. So guys, check out the Real Food Cookbook. Use code MMA for 30% off. The link is in my description. Don't forget that discount.